Hi, welcome to part 3 videos that I'm creating for Dynamic Function Exchange with ZYNQ Ultracale Plus. I'm Mohammad Sadri. These are hobby videos I'm creating for Dynamic Function Exchange, and in previous 2 videos we had an introduction to Dynamic Function Exchange, and also we briefly looked at the Vivado design that we use as an example for our partial reconfiguration flow. In this video, I'm gonna look at that design a little bit more and continue with partial reconfiguration flow. This video is in parts supported by Bliefeld company. They are located here in Munich, and they create low-cost automotive grade lidars. You can work with them or you can buy the lidar and use for your own project. So let's have a brief look at the Vivado project. I want to be sure that we know everything about the Vivado project, all of the different corners, aspects, and then we go ahead with partial reconfiguration flow. So here we have basically our folder structure. I have described this folder structure to you before, and inside the sh folder we have a set of shell scripts, simple shell scripts, and basically if you have access to the sources, if you run run.sh, then this runs the whole flow for you, creates Vivado project, compiles the project, creates bit streams, creates the XSA file, so that then later you can basically run Vitis and run the software. Now, I don't want to run that. Inside the TCL folder, you have create project, the TCL that creates a Vivado project for you and runs the partial reconfiguration flow. You have also create project without flow that creates the Vivado project for you but doesn't run the partial reconfiguration flow. These two initial part of these two are basically the same. This one contains some more functions, for some more commands for partial reconfiguration flow. So I'm gonna run this one so that we can briefly have a look at the Vivado project again, and then we continue. So I am inside sh, and I run without flow.sh. So this runs the Vivado, creates the project. Okay, so Vivado project is being created. Now I want to show you something which is important for our project while the Vivado project is running. If we look at the folder structure, there is this IP folder here inside the folder structure, and it contains basically 2 IPs that I have written to be used in this example design, as I have described before. One of them is a simple IP with AXI Lite interface, another one is an IP with AXI Stream interface. These are custom IPs, I have created them myself. Now, inside the each of the IP folders, you can find the packaged IP folder. Inside the packaged IP folder, basically you can find the packaged IP. So when you are familiar with Vivado project flow, then you add this path to your repository, IP repository in your Vivado project, and then you have access to this IP. And also the same is for the other IP. Now the point is, and this is important, is when I want to give these IPs to my Vivado project, I first generate them. That is, for this Vivado project here, it doesn't need to have directly access to this folder. This folder doesn't need to be directly added to the IP repository. The important is you create a Vivado project, you generate the IP, and then you give your Vivado project the folder, the XCI file that contains the IP. This is important for partial reconfiguration flow. Okay, so this is our Vivado project. We have seen this before. As I described to you previously, if you take a normal Vivado project, then usually this block diagram that you create, it's going to be the top level for your Vivado project. For partial reconfiguration flow, currently this is not the case. You should have a top level file above this block diagram. So your reconfigurable modules, your reconfigurable items, they should be instantiated inside that top level module. You cannot directly have the reconfigurable module here inside the block diagram. So what you see is, since I have basically 3 reconfigurable regions in my design, then what you see here is I have 3 XI interfaces going outside of the block design, and basically they are here, they appear here inside my top level module. So if I look at the block diagram here again, then I can see some interfaces, they are going out of my block diagram. For example, here, down here, I have MXI light count 15. This is the XI light interface going to the reconfigurable region which contains my IP with XI light interface. This one is the clock which is being generated here inside the block diagram, and is going to the all of the reconfigurable regions that I have. In my design, my reconfigurable regions have all the same clock. Then this one is the XI stream interface, which is going to my XI stream reconfigurable region. That's the reconfigurable region that will be containing multiply or to the power of 4 XI stream IP. And obviously this guy has a return pass from the IP. So if I look at the other side of my block diagram, then I can see that there is an entry from the same reconfigurable region to my basically Vivado design. And then finally I have the reset to reconfigurable regions. Obviously the reset has 3 bits. Each of the bits is going to one of the reconfigurable regions. I have the ICAP in output interface which goes to the ICAP block, and this is used when we want to use the DFX controller for partial reconfiguration. And finally we have this XI stream interface which is going to the reconfigurable region which contains either the natural logarithm or reciprocal double calculating IP, and this has also a return pass. So if I look at the block diagram, then this stream of data goes to the IP and then it returns back from the IP here. Okay, so this is the design, and we have the XIDMA interfaces, XIDMA engines. I have described this to you before. The important is I have decouplers for each of these interfaces. For example, if I take this interface here, then if I follow this interface, I reach I reach a DFX decoupler. So the main interface enters the DFX decoupler, and then from the DFX decoupler we go to our interface here. And this DFX decoupler is being controlled by two means. First of all, basically this decouple signal goes high either when the DFX controller commands it to go high. So the DFX controller is capable of decoupling basically our reconfigurable region from the rest of the design. And also, if I don't want to use the DFX controller, if I want to use only pure software, then as you see here, this guy is connected to a GPIO, and the GPIO can be simply controlled by your software. So through GPIO you can decouple this IP, this reconfigurable region, from the rest of your design. So when I want to reconfigure this region to program it with, for example, the next IP, which counts, let's say, by 5, then first I decouple this region from the rest of my logic, and then I perform the reconfiguration. Now, this is the same for all of the 3 reconfigurable regions that we have. It's very important that one configures each of these decoupling IPs correctly. The correct configuration of decoupling IP is very important. So pay attention to the type of the interface that you define for the decoupling IP. So make sure that the interface that you are selecting here is a correct type of interface, and make sure that all of those basically signals which are being transferred from this clock domain to from your block design to the reconfigurable region, they are here decoupled. Okay, so I have seen Vivado by default doesn't decouple all of the signals. Basically there are a set of signals that Vivado doesn't decouple, and I have seen sometimes this creates problem. So make sure they are decoupled. Now it's extremely important that one configures the DFX controller correctly. The DFX controller has all of the same capabilities that for reconfiguring the regions and for decoupling them and for putting them into reset. It has the same capabilities as you have on the software side. So through software and through GPIOs with this design, you can put any of your modules into reset. So this is the reset signal. This reset signal is either being driven by the DFX controller or being driven by a GPIO that you have in your design. So if you don't configure the DFX controller properly, what happens is when you bring up your system, reset is, for example, always active, or these the decoupled signal is high, and it causes your reconfigurable region to be decoupled from the rest of your design. The correct configuration of DFX controller is very important, and I think I will create a separate video for configuration of DFX controller. So this is our Vivado design, and obviously it has a top level HTML file, and this guy is being instantiated inside our top module. So if I look at my top module source code, the Verilog source code that I have written for the top module, then the block design is located here. It's one of the modules inside the top level. And what else do I have in the top level? I have all of my basically 3 reconfigurable IPs. Okay, so I have this wrapper here, floating point wrapper, which is a wrapper around the IP located inside my floating point reconfigurable region. And in my floating point reconfigurable region, I will have either the natural logarithm or reciprocal. And these are the IPs coming from ZYNQ. I have just used those IPs. Then I have instantiation of the wrapper for the counter, axiolyte counter, and then I have instantiation for the wrapper of basically of my stream IP. And if I open, for example, one of these wrappers, what I see inside the wrapper code is direct instantiation of my IP. So again, it's important for to note that how I do it. I give Vivado the generated IP. I don't give Vivado directly the IP. In the partial reconfiguration flow, as we go ahead with the partial reconfiguration flow, you will see that I need to give Vivado basically the files for the IPs that I want to have in my reconfigurable regions. What I do is I use the IP, I generate those files, and I give those files to Vivado. So if I look at the folder structure again, we have this IP folder. It contains the definition of our IPs. For the case of natural logarithm and recip, obviously it's located inside ZYNQ's repository. Now, if you look, there is another folder in the folder structure. It's called IP generated. These are the generated IPs. I have created a Vivado project, and then I have added the paths to this IP folder in that Vivado project, and then I have generated the IP. I have indicated the properties of the IP. I have given it a name, and then I have generated the IP, and now these are the files, and these are the ones that I use in my main Vivado project. So I have floating point ln. It contains the XCI file. This is the generated IP. Then I have the for recip, I have for count by 1, I have for count by 5, I have for molt, and I have for po. It's important that these are the sources that I'm using in this project. This is a little bit different than what you do in a normal design flow. In a normal design flow, what you do is you come to the settings here, you come to the settings, and then inside the IP, inside the repository section, you give the tool the passes to your IP repositories. I have done this here. However, the generation of IP is done before. It's not inside this project. What this project uses are the XCI files. Okay, so I believe that the Vivado design is to a good level studied, and I hope you have understood whatever I have done here. I think all of the points are mentioned, and now for this basically design, very important next step is you run the synthesis, and as you run the synthesis, you or basically you can also open the elaborated design. You can run the synthesis, open the synthesized design, or you can open the elaborated design. And very important is we need to do a floor planning for our design. Basically, for each of my 3 reconfigurable regions, I need to tell the tool where these regions should be located on my FPGA. This is the very important next step. So I simply go ahead with design synthesis. Okay, so now the synthesis is done, and I can open the synthesized design. And as I open the synthesized design, then I can perform the flow planning. Now, for the design, I have already done the flow planning. So I have already a constraint file which contains the flow plan. So I open the synthesized design. If you have the deliveries of this project. Then inside the XDC folder, you can find the area.xdc file, which is basically the area constraints that we use for our design. Okay, so this is already there, and let me show it briefly. We basically have 3 P blocks, and then we have the property needed for partial reconfiguration, and then each P block has a region. Okay, so this file is in the deliveries, it's added to the Vivado project, and as I open the synthesized design, it's being applied practically. So as I open the synthesized design, you will see the flow planning is already done. So I have basically 3 areas. I have indicated 3 areas in my design, 3 physical blocks, 3 P blocks, and I have assigned to each of these blocks, P blocks, one of my basically reconfigurable regions. So this one is for floating point, this one is for axial light, and this one is for streaming. However, if you open the synthesized design for the first time without the constraint file, then you can basically right click on your module, on the wrapper, the one I showed you in the top level, and then you can select flow planning, and then you can say new P block, and then you can give it a name, and then you can basically draw your P block. That's all you need to do, and then you save the changes that you make into a constraint file, and that's basically your flow plan will be ready. So now that I have the flow plan ready, and my design is synthesizing fine, then it's time to basically go through the rest of partial reconfiguration flow. We continue in the next video.